Firstly, our point of departure is that we really need a paradigm shift. And part of the paradigm shift must involve looking at last year's budget speech and looking at last year's promises in the budget review and assessing as Parliament whether those were achieved or whether those were just words that were spoken to just get the process through and get us to just rubber stamp a process. I think that is very important, Chair, going forward, that we should really start the year by not getting a forward-looking budget speech, but by getting an input from the Treasury about what is it that was said last year and how have we achieved, and what are the key performance indicators on the matters that were said. For example, slide 22 of the DG's presentation this morning talks about the budget reaffirms government's commitment to increasing living standards. So what are the key KPIs of increased living standards? And how will we be able to measure that these were not just words that were spoken in the last slide of the DG's presentation at this meeting on this Friday, but that these were words that had gravitas, that had that were spoken with conviction, and that they were followed by deeds. Because I think that is part of the problem with what we do in South Africa, is that we have wonderful plans, but our execution sadly lacks. My second set of questions relates to the debt. Now that the budget is not approved and that we are on day 1 month and 23 days without the budget in the new fiscal year, how is that going to affect the borrowing program for the year? Because the borrowing, as far as I remember, is done by bond auctions that are conducted every week. Has Treasury been conducting bond auctions in the last 1.5 months? And under what authority? Because I think the authority in the legislation is the authority to spend up to 45% of last year's budget, to spend and not to borrow. It doesn't talk about borrowing. So I'm just wondering if there has been any bond auctions that have been conducted, and under what authority were they conducted, legislative authority? And if not, how has the inability to borrow in the last 1 month and 23 days, and in fact, it's going to be, because this process will go on until the 31st of July, according to the latest, so until July. So that is like for a quarter of the year of no borrowing, if the borrowing is not being done. But if it is being done, under what authority is it being done? Thirdly, I want to add on to the question of Honorable Khanyane, what strategies do we have as the National Treasury to reduce debt service costs? Strategies. So what are we doing to the bond portfolio? What are we doing to the yield curve? How are we managing the yield curve? How are we managing maturities to make sure that we can reduce debt service costs? Ironically, we don't necessarily see our debt levels as being very high at 72% and growing to 77%. The average in the world is close to 100%, both in emerging markets and in developed markets. So at 72%, I think we still have some headroom for increasing debt, but our debt service cost is the problem. Our debt service costs are the high, which talk to the efficiency of the management of our debt, as well as the costs related to it. Countries with debt service costs as relative to GDP that is higher than ours manage to keep their debt service costs lower. And so the question is, what is it that they're doing that we are not doing? And how do we do risk management in the management of our liabilities? Thirdly, I see that the IPPs contributed IPP's liabilities were reduced, contingent liabilities were reduced from 213 billion rand last year to now 190 billion projected for this 2025. What accounts for that? Because I believe that the IPP program is going ahead, and as the IPP program is going ahead, we continue to issue government guarantees to solar and wind farmers. So I just want detail on how that reduction happened. And also the RAF contingent liability is increasing from 368 billion to 384 billion, which is more than a third of a trillion rand in RAF contingent liabilities. And these contingent liabilities are the things that can actually collapse the state later on if they materialize. So we are interested to know what accounts for that increase in the RAF contingent liabilities, and in the light of what the honorable member earlier said about the fuel tax and the RAF, how does that play out? Chair, growth is now projected to be 1.4%, which is half a percentage point, a whole half a percentage point less than what was projected a month ago. Now, a month ago, most of the people who came to the public hearing said that the Treasury growth projections are unrealistic, and the Treasury disagreed. So was it just a paper disagreement, or a disagreement that was indeed not based on fact and thorough, dispassionate modeling of the economy? Or was it just a disagreement because the number had been put down, it came from wherever it came from, and it had to be defended? Because that is not how we should approach budgeting. As you know...
Kindly conclude, Honorable Molefe.
Yes. Chair, the other statement that was made was renewable energy could drive economic growth. I don't know how that will happen with renewable energy projects in wind and solar having an energy availability factor of 30%. As soon as the sun goes down, solar is not available. So how is that going to contribute to economic growth? And lastly, Chair, what happened to the nuclear procurement program? Is it budgeted for? Are we proceeding? Because I think that the Minister of Energy had announced the RFP or a request for information, one of the two.
As MK Party, our position is very clear. We think National Treasury, under the leadership of Minister Godongwana, seems to be taking South Africa for a fool, or South Africans at least for a fool. We are saying this, Chairperson, because it doesn't require a rocket science or maybe a rocket scientist to determine that, firstly, fuel levy is an indirect tax. And it's not just an indirect tax, but it's a very, very regressive one because of its multiplier effect. Fuel levy increases the price of fuel. And we all know what is indirectly affected by that. Ukudla, transport, and who's using this transport? Who's buying a lot of this food? Poor households, those that we claim to be representing and championing their cause here, are adversely affected because the last percentage of their disposable income is used on these items. So you can't come in here and say this is a pro-poor, a people-centered budget. We are very clear as MK that as South Africans, we are taken for a fool. And I think, Minister, you know very well that how does the cost of transport affects workers? I mean, you are a former trade unionist. The mobility of workers is adversely affected by any increase on transport cost. David McKhondo, as a scholar of economics, but also a Communist Party leader, I hope you are still one, or maybe you still carry the DNA of a communist at least. You know very well the impact of this increase on the people that you claim to be championing their cause. This indirect tax is extremely regressive in the sense that it's going to have a negative impact on production input. The input costs are going to rise as a result of this regressive move. And as they rise, definitely we know that our unpatriotic business sector will pass on these increases to the consumers through higher prices for the goods that the people will be buying from them, but also for services that they will be providing. I don't think they will have any other option but to do that, because their assignment is the bottom line, which is to realize profit. Then the question is, where is this poor budget that the minister has been telling the world of? Where is this people-centered budget that National Treasury is advocating to be captured in this budget speech? We want to grow economy. How are you going to grow economy if our mobility of our people will be restricted by high cost of transport? How are you going to grow economy if the unemployed, those who don't have money, won't have money even to travel, to go for interviews? Let's be practical. Stop fooling South Africans. This budget is not a poor budget. This budget, I can tell you next year, honorable members, because I know some of you have been whipped by those who are in control of this GNU relationship of yours. We will be here addressing the worst case scenario of the South African economic landscape because of this nonsensical proposal that has been tabled to the nation. In the long run, or maybe the immediate, because I can see Treasury seems to be suffering from the poverty of ideas in terms of dealing with the budget process. You are running for quick lying, low hanging fruits, which is the vulnerable. Of course, you'll realize the revenue that you are projecting. But in the long run, the danger is that economic growth that we all need, the job creation that we all need, will not be realized. As if this is not enough, Honorable Mauto said something very important. We raised this thing. You seem not to be listening. Even majority of the people who came to public hearings raised this thing. You haven't considered the submission of looking into the personal income tax aspect, because we said without inflationary adjustment for tax for tax brackets, the increases that will be realized by the working class will be meaningless. So it's clear that you might be listening to someone, but not the people that you claim to be leading. But anyway, we all know now who's in charge. We know who's owning GNU. That's why we are surprised by the sudden about 10 of DA to support this particular burdensome budget, process. How do you say you don't support VAT because you take care of the poor? But the most regressive indirect tax system get the first support from you. Then you expect us to take you serious. This is hypocritical. If not whimsical, I mean, this is laughable. It's clear that the masters and the owners of GNU have cracked the whip.
1 minute, Honorable Van Rooyen.
Well, we still have a lot to say, but what you should know, Chairperson, is that the this doesn't come closer. This budget speech doesn't come closer to assisting this country going forward. In fact, this was more of a fireplace story where our people were taken for a ride. This is not a budget speech that should be supported. Thank you.